$240,000 a year. 98 out of every 100 people who pick up a torch will never earn near it. Most top out around 60,000 and stay there for 30 years. That is what a saturation underwater welder earns on offshore contracts, and the gap between him and the shop floor is the widest in any skilled trade. Most people think welding is one job you get better at over time. It is not. Welding is a stack of separate certifications, and each one is a different job with a different wage. A production welder running the same seam 8 hours a day and a pipe welder doing a 6G root pass on a live line are both called welders, and they are not in the same trade. Your pay is not set by how many years you have held a torch. It is set by which certifications you hold and what you can weld in positions where gravity is fighting you. Let's start at the bottom. The shop helper earns $16 to $19 an hour, about $33,300 a year. You barely weld, you grind. You grind slag off other people's welds until your hands buzz for an hour after you put the tool down. You sweep the bay, you rack steel, you cut stock on a bandsaw, and you tack pieces together so an actual welder can run the bead. The shop is hot in a way that is difficult to describe, because you are wearing leather in a building with no air conditioning and open flame. Getting in requires almost nothing, a high school diploma or not even that, and a willingness to show up. That is the entire barrier. About 40% quit inside a year, and heat is the leading reason by a wide margin. The second is that they expected to weld and discovered they will not touch a production part for 6 months. The thing nobody tells you is that helpers who ask the welders to check their practic coupons on lunch break get moved up in months. The ones who wait to be taught stay helpers for years. The production welder earns $22 to $28 an hour, roughly $45,800 to $58,200 a year. You are welding, but you are welding the same joint repeatedly. A fixture holds the part, you run the same 11-inch bead in the same flat position several hundred times a shift, and a gauge checks it. It is honest work, and it is genuinely monotonous. You get fast, your consistency becomes excellent, and your range narrows. You also learn what a good weld sounds like, which is a real thing and not a figure of speech. A properly running short-circuit transfer weld makes a steady frying sound, like bacon, and an experienced welder hears a problem before the bead looks wrong. Wire speed too high changes the pitch. Insufficient shielding gas changes it again. Welders working in a loud shop learn to feel this through the gun instead, and the transition from watching the puddle to feeling the arc is roughly the point where someone stops being new. Getting here needs a basic certification, usually flat and horizontal position on mild steel, which a 6-month trade program or a company's in-house test will give you. Cost runs $5,000 to $15,000, or nothing if the shop trains you. Very few people wash out at this level because the work is repeatable. What happens instead is stalling. A large share of American welders reach this rung and never leave it, because the shop has no reason to certify you higher and you have no reason to pay for it yourself. The thing nobody tells you is that this is the trap of the trade. 10 years as a production welder makes you a 10-year employee, not a 10-year welder, and a shop hiring for structural work will test you and find you have never welded overhead in your life. There is a specific reason the trap closes so quietly. A production shop has no incentive to certify you higher, because a welder certified for structural work becomes more expensive and more likely to leave. So the shop certifies you to exactly what the shop needs, and the paperwork that proves what you can weld never grows. Meanwhile, you genuinely improve at the joint in front of you, which feels like progress. The gap only becomes visible when you take a test somewhere else. Welders describe this moment with a consistent phrase. They say they found out they had 1 year of experience 10 times. The structural welder earns $32 to $42 an hour, about $66,600 to $87,400 a year, more with per diem on travel jobs. You weld buildings, bridges, and heavy equipment, and you weld them where they are. That means overhead with molten metal directly above your face, vertical with the puddle trying to run down, and in corners you can barely reach. You work outside, at height, in whatever weather exists that day. Getting here means certifying to a structural code in multiple positions, and the practical test is the gate. You either lay a sound bead overhead or you do not. and the coupon gets bent and X-rayed to prove it. Roughly a third of production welders who attempt the structural test fail on the first try, almost always on overhead or vertical up. The thing nobody tells you is that structural certifications expire. Most require documented continuity, and if you go 6 months without welding under that code, you retest. Welders lose entire pay grades by taking an office job for a year. It is worth explaining what a certification actually is, because most people outside the trade picture a diploma. It is not. A weld certification is a specific document that says you personally welded a specific joint configuration in a specific position on a specific base metal within a specific thickness range using a specific process, and that the resulting coupon passed a destructive or radiographic test. Change any one of those variables and the certification does not cover it. A welder certified for 3/8-inch plate in the flat position on mild steel with flux core is not certified for stainless pipe in the 6G position with tungsten inert gas. They are different tests. This is why welders talk about stacking certifications rather than getting certified, and why a folder of current papers is the single most valuable thing a welder owns. The pipe welder earns $46 to $65 an hour on union scale, roughly $95,700 to $135,200 a year, and rig welders who own their truck bill considerably more. You run a root pass on the inside of a joint you cannot fully see, then fill and cap it, and the entire weld is X-rayed. A rejected weld gets cut out and you do it again on your own time. You travel constantly and you work shutdowns, which are 12-hour days for 6 weeks with no days off. Getting here requires a 6G certification and usually years of structural work first. The 6G test failure rate runs near 50% on first attempt. The thing nobody tells you is that pipe welders are paid on X-ray results, not hours. A welder with a 2% reject rate and a welder with a 15% reject rate earn wildly differently, because the second one gets released from the job in week 2. The 6G position deserves explanation because it is the gate to the top half of this trade. The pipe is fixed at a 45-degree angle and it does not rotate. That means a single continuous weld travels through flat, vertical, and overhead positions in one pass, and gravity fights you differently in every inch of it. The root pass is the hardest part because you are melting the 2 pipe edges together from the outside while controlling how much metal penetrates to the inside where you cannot see it. Too little and it fails inspection for lack of fusion. Too much and it drops through and restricts the pipe. The acceptable window is a fraction of a millimeter and you are holding it by hand, at arm's reach, sometimes lying on your back. The certified welding inspector earns $48 to $70 an hour, about $99,800 to $145,600 a year, with senior inspectors on major projects higher. You stop welding and you start judging welds. You read blueprints and weld procedure specifications. You verify that the welder is qualified for the joint in front of him. You inspect visually and interpret X-ray and ultrasonic results, and you sign your name to whether a structure is sound. Your signature carries legal weight. Getting here means passing the American Welding Society Inspector exam, which requires documented trade experience plus a 3-part test covering fundamentals, practical inspection, and a code book you must navigate under time pressure. Failure rate is around 40%, and it fails experienced welders regularly because the exam is a reading and code interpretation test rather than a welding test. The thing nobody tells you is that this rung is where welders go when their body stops cooperating. Knees, shoulders, and eyes give out. And inspection is the way to stay in the trade, at full pay, with a torch you no longer hold. Before the last rung, something the trade does not advertise. Welding damages the body in specific and documented ways. Arc flash burns the cornea, and every welder has done it at least once, usually early. Manganese and hexavalent chromium in welding fume are neurotoxic and carcinogenic respectively. And ventilation in real shops is frequently inadequate. Hearing goes from grinding. Knees and shoulders go from working in positions the body was not built to hold. The trade has improved enormously on this in 20 years, with better respirators, better fume extraction, and better awareness. But the welders currently in their 50s came up before most of that. If you are entering now, the single highest return decision you can make is wearing a supplied air respirator every day from your first week, and it costs you nothing but the habit. The underwater welder earns $140,000 to $240,000 a year on offshore saturation contracts, though inland work pays far less at $50,000 to $80,000. You are a commercial diver first and a welder second, and that order matters. You weld offshore structures, pipelines, and rigs at depth, in water with near zero visibility, by feel. In saturation, you live in a pressurized chamber for 28 days and get lowered to the worksite in a bell, because decompressing daily would kill you. You weld wet or you weld in a dry habitat depending on the job. Getting here means commercial dive school, which runs $20,000 to $30,000 and several months, plus welding certifications, plus a dive medical. Attrition in dive school is high, near 30%, and it is mostly people discovering that the confined dark water is intolerable for them. This is also the most dangerous rung in the trade by a wide margin, with fatality rates well above any other welding role, and drowning and differential pressure incidents cause more deaths than electrical shock. The thing nobody tells you is that most underwater welders do it for 6 to 8 years and stop. The money is real, the career length is not, and almost everyone plans their exit from the day they start. There is one more rung that sits off to the side and pays better than most of the latter. Specialty alloy welders work titanium, Inconel, Hastelloy, and other exotic metals for aerospace, semiconductor, and pharmaceutical work. Pay runs $58 to $82 an hour, $120,000 to $170,000 a year, in clean indoor shops with no weather and no travel. The work is slow, precise, and performed under a microscope in some cases. A single weld might take 2 hours and be X-rayed, dye-penetrant tested, and dimensionally inspected before it is accepted. Getting there requires exceptional hand control and usually a specific employer willing to train you, because the material cost of practice pieces is prohibitive. Titanium is welded inside a purge chamber filled with argon, because at temperature, it will absorb oxygen from the air and become brittle. Very few welders ever touch this work, and most who do never go back to structural. There is a path outside the ladder that out-earns most of it. A welder who buys a rig truck and contracts independently bills $110 to $160 an hour on pipeline and industrial work. Gross income of $200,000 to $300,000 is achievable in a strong year. The truck, welder, and equipment run $70,000 to $140,000 up front, and you carry your own insurance, your own downtime, and months with no contract. It is the highest ceiling in the trade for anyone who does not want to get in the water, and roughly half the people who try it return to wages within 3 years. One last thing worth understanding about how this trade actually pays. Welding is one of the few careers where geography changes the number more than experience does. The same 6G certification is worth $95,000 in one state and $140,000 in another, and the difference is union density and industrial base rather than cost of living. Shutdown and turnaround work concentrates in the Gulf Coast, the Midwest, and specific refinery and chemical corridors, and welders who are willing to travel to that work earn substantially more than equally skilled welders who stay home. This is the actual reason 2 welders with identical papers can be $60,000 apart. It is not talent, and it is rarely effort. It is a decision about how much of your life you are willing to spend in a hotel. Shop helper, $33,300. Production welder, $58,200. Structural welder, $87,400. Pipe welder, $135,200. Certified welding inspector, $145,600. Underwater welder, $240,000. About half fail the 6G test on first attempt, and around 40% fail the inspector exam. Fewer than 2% of everyone who starts in a shop bay ever reaches the top rung. The ceiling in this trade is enormous, and the reason most welders never see it is that nobody in the shop ever tells them the ladder exists. Next, every level of a commercial pilot.